IT's 12:15 a.m. A screen just told this man that 5 nuclear missiles are heading for the Soviet Union. He has less than 25 minutes to decide whether to end the world. This actually happened, and almost nobody knows his name. To understand how close this got, you need to understand the world that built this system in the first place. By the early 1980s, the US and the USSR had enough nuclear weapons pointed at each other to end civilization several times over. Both sides lived by the same terrifying logic. If the other guy launches first, you have to launch back before their missiles even land, or you lose the ability to respond at all. That logic has a name: mutually assured destruction, and it only works if everyone reacts instantly. There's no time to double-check, no time to call a meeting. The whole system was built on speed, which meant it was also built on trust in machines that hadn't been tested under real conditions. During the Cold War, if Soviet radar ever detected an American launch, the entire country had one job: figure out, in under 30 minutes, whether to fire back before the warheads landed. Not 30 minutes to launch. 30 minutes total. Detect it, confirm it, decide, and act. That's shorter than the episode of TV you watched last night. And the person making that first call usually wasn't a general. It was one guy in a chair underground. His name was Stanislav Petrov. He was a lieutenant colonel, an engineer by training, working inside Serpukhov 15, one of the USSR's secret early warning bunkers outside Moscow. And here's the first thing nobody tells you. That night wasn't even supposed to be his shift. The senior officer scheduled to be there couldn't make it. Petrov got called in as a replacement. The man history remembers for possibly saving the planet was there because of a scheduling gap. Now, if you're picturing constant tension, alarms, shouting, red lights flashing every hour, forget it. The real job was mostly the opposite. 12-hour shifts, same chair, same screen, same static. Petrov himself compared it to a movie where nothing happens, on a loop, forever. That's the part almost no documentary shows you. The bunker wasn't built for drama, it was built for boredom. And boredom is exactly what makes the one moment that does happen so dangerous, because nobody's ready for it. The bunker itself was its own kind of world. These command centers were built deep underground, designed to survive a direct strike and keep functioning after everything above ground was gone. Thick blast doors, independent power, filtered air, enough supplies to keep a crew running for days without ever seeing daylight. People worked entire careers half buried in concrete, watching screens for a war everyone hoped would never come. It's the kind of place that sounds like fiction until you remember people clocked in and out of it like a regular job. Here's something almost nobody covers. Inside these command bunkers, officers didn't just watch for missiles inbound. They watched 3 lights. One light confirmed the country's leadership had authorized a launch. One confirmed that Soviet leadership itself had been wiped out. A decapitation strike. And one confirmed an actual incoming attack. 3 lights. Any combination lighting up meant something different, and something worse. Now hold that image, because on the night we're talking about, it wasn't a light that lit up first. It was a siren. Petrov wasn't alone that night. 12 other officers were in that room. Some of them young conscripts who had never seen a real alert before, all of them reporting to him. Technically, Petrov wasn't even the one authorized to make the final call. The decision chain was supposed to run up through generals, through the Kremlin. But at 12:15 a.m., with the room watching him, the decision landed on his desk first. Then the alarm went off. The system reported one missile launched from the United States. Petrov later said it felt, in his own words, like sitting on a hot frying pan. Sirens blaring, the room dead silent, 12 faces turned toward him. And then it got worse. Seconds later, the system reported a second missile, then a third, a fourth, a fifth. 5 warheads, according to the computer, now inbound. Every protocol Petrov had ever been trained on said the same thing. Report it up the chain, and the chain responds with a retaliatory strike. That's literally what the system existed for. Here's what most retellings skip. Petrov had no backup system to double-check the data. American early warning stations had already had false alarms of their own around this same period. But every single time, a second, independent system caught the mistake before anyone acted. The Soviet setup that night had no equivalent safety net, no second opinion, just Petrov's gut against a screen telling him the world was ending. He had a choice. Trust the machine, report a launch, and set retaliation in motion. Or trust his instinct that a 5-missile first strike made no logical sense. Because if the US really wanted to start a war, they wouldn't open with 5 missiles. They'd open with everything. He picked instinct. He called it a false alarm and told his superiors to stand down before it was even confirmed. He was right. A rare alignment of sunlight bouncing off high-altitude clouds had confused the Soviet satellite into reading it as missile engine flares. It was a glitch, a weather accident that nearly triggered a nuclear war. And this wasn't even the only time the whole system nearly broke. A few years earlier, American operators watching a NORAD screen saw what looked like a massive Soviet attack forming, complete with realistic tracking data. Bombers scrambled and missile crews were put on alert before anyone realized what actually happened. A training tape simulating an attack had accidentally been loaded into the live system. Different country, different mistake, same terrifying pattern. Machines built to react fast enough to end the world, occasionally reacting to nothing at all. Petrov's night wasn't a strange exception to how the Cold War worked. It was the system doing exactly what it was built to do, running into a flaw nobody had planned for. Now here's the part that should make you angry. Petrov didn't get a medal. He didn't get a promotion. He got a quiet reprimand for not filing his paperwork correctly during the incident, and the whole event was buried, classified for decades. The man who arguably prevented a full nuclear exchange went back to work like nothing happened. No parade, no headline, just Soviet bureaucracy shrugging and moving on. For 15 years, almost nobody outside a small circle of Soviet officials knew this happened. It only became public in the late 90s, after the USSR collapsed, and former officials started talking. Petrov didn't tell his own family what he'd done. His wife found out from a magazine article, years after the fact. He wasn't hiding it out of modesty. In his mind, he'd just been doing his job. And here's the thing. Serpukhov 15 wasn't some rare, one-off facility. The Soviet Union built a whole network of these underground command centers, and some of that Cold War infrastructure is still active in Russia today, reportedly still running on that same red-amber light logic we talked about earlier. One bunker, in Latvia, was actually declassified and opened for public tours back in 2003. You can walk through blast doors that were built to survive a direct hit, stand in the exact kind of room Petrov sat in. It's one of the strangest tourist attractions on Earth, and honestly worth a trip if you're ever in the region. Play it forward for a second. If Petrov had followed protocol exactly, if he'd just passed the alert up the chain the way he was trained to, historians generally agree the Soviet response likely would have been a retaliatory launch, based on the doctrine and time pressure in place that night. Not because anyone wanted a war, because the system was built to assume the worst and move fast. One man's 15 seconds of hesitation is arguably the reason you're watching this video right now, instead of learning about this in a very different kind of history class. Petrov did eventually get some recognition. Decades later, the UN gave him an award. A documentary was made about him. He met with actors and diplomats who wanted to shake the hand of the man who didn't push the button. But by his own account, he never saw himself as a hero. He said he was just the guy who happened to be sitting in that chair. That anyone trained the same way would have made the same call. Most historians disagree. Most historians think that Knight could have gone very differently with almost anyone else in that seat. It's worth remembering he wasn't the only person during the Cold War whose split-second judgment quietly kept things from spiraling. During the Cuban Missile Crisis 2 decades earlier, a Soviet submarine officer refused to authorize a nuclear torpedo launch, even after his own crew believed they were already under attack. A decision that, by many historians' accounts, may have single-handedly prevented the crisis from turning into a shooting war. Petrov's night wasn't an isolated fluke. It was part of a pattern. The Cold War came terrifyingly close to ending everything, more than once. And it was ordinary people making unglamorous, split-second calls who kept pulling it back from the edge. Here's the uncomfortable part. The system that almost failed in 1983, the compressed decision windows, the reliance on satellites and computers, the fact that it can still come down to one human being making a judgment call in under half an hour. A version of that setup is still active right now in more than one country. Petrov's story isn't really about the Cold War. It's about how close, automated, and accidental can end up standing next to each other, and how much of history quietly depends on people nobody ever hears about. He died in 2017. Quietly, at home, largely unknown outside a small circle of people who understood exactly what he'd done. No statue, no national holiday. Just a guy in a chair who decided for 15 seconds not to trust the machine. If this is the first time you've heard his name, that's kind of the point of this video. Subscribe if you want more stories history almost forgot.